This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning and welcome to the Friday edition of First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler, and our expert media panel is here to discuss the week's top headlines. Among them, the City Council president declines a colleague's request that he step aside pending a state investigation into his text messages about JEA. We'll also be discussing why St. Augustine is cracking down on horse-drawn carriages and the beating death of a jail inmate who'd been denied a bed at a state mental health facility. Finally, all options are on the table when it comes to the Skyway's future, including perhaps a Highline-style pedestrian park. And the state's prospects dim for recouping federal money spent building Alligator Alcatraz. Join our conversation. You can reach us on air by calling 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnects.org to find all the ways to connect with us. It's all ahead this hour after today's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. Former President Bill Clinton will testify before a congressional committee in New York today. Clinton is expected to answer questions from the panel about the investigation into the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. NPR's Sage Miller reports today's closed-door deposition comes a day after former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testified before the panel.
Hillary Clinton reiterated that she was disappointed that the deposition was held behind closed doors instead of publicly. She said she answered the same questions over and over.
I don't know how many times I had to say I did not know Jeffrey Epstein. I never went to his island. I never went to his homes. I never went to his offices.
Clinton also said that her husband's relationship with Epstein ended several years before Epstein's criminal history came to light. Republican Committee Chair James Comer told reporters Clinton answered most of their questions, but that they weren't satisfied with all her answers. Sage Miller, NPR News.
After a long bidding war, new Paramount CEO David Ellison is set to take over Warner Brothers Discovery. NPR's David Folkenflik reports he outbid Netflix, which already had a deal in place with Warner's board to buy much of its assets.
This is going to be a major player in Hollywood intended to take on the streamers, not just Netflix, but also Amazon Prime and Apple, to have, a major force to walk into the future of streaming.
That's NPR's David Folkenflik reporting. The financial technology company Block says it's cutting about 40% of its workforce. Roughly 4,000 employees will be laid off as the company shifts more of its business toward artificial intelligence. The layoffs are the latest in a wave of job cuts across the tech sector. The Pakistani defense minister says his country is in an open war with Afghanistan. NPR's Dia Hadid reports Pakistan has hit installations belonging to the Taliban government.
A Taliban spokesman says they're fighting back, even deploying drones. And one militant group shared a video to journalists of them fighting Pakistani forces. Pakistan has struck Afghanistan in the past, but hitting Taliban government installations is a major escalation. Pakistan accuses the Taliban of sheltering militant groups and even aiding some that have been striking the country with increasing frequency and lethality. The Taliban says they're not to blame for Pakistan's security failures. Abdul Basit, a writer on South Asia's security challenges, said the strikes will only trigger more violence. But he adds, Pakistan is running out of options.
This is very bad and is going to be a bloody summer.
Dia Hadid, NPR News, Mumbai.
On Wall Street, Dow futures are down more than 500 points at this hour. This is NPR News.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. Right now it is 9:04. Tax season may help sell new cars being shown at this weekend's Jacksonville International Auto Show, according to financial experts. And that's good news for local auto dealers lining up their latest cars, trucks, and SUVs at the show at the Prime Osborne Convention Center. People who buy new vehicles made in the United States can file for a new tax deduction on their 2025 tax filing. So as new models were rolled into their display spots yesterday, Jacksonville Automobile Dealers Association Vice President Bill Lynch says it looks great for their future.
having this tax rebate, I mean, it's anything down on a car today just helps that payment, because payments are a big deal for our clients, so it's a big deal. Along with the interest rate deduction, so that's another big plus for our clients.
More than 200 new vehicles from 18 automakers will be on display at the Convention Center on Water Street from today through Sunday. More information is at jaxautoshow.com. Mild temperatures to start the day here in Northeast Florida. Highs will eventually reach the low 80s before rainfall this afternoon and evening. The best timing for showers looks to be around 4 and 7 this afternoon and evening. Rainfall doesn't look like it'll be much of a soaker as previously forecasted. Rainfall amounts will be close to half an inch. Showers will linger through most of the night and exit the area around daybreak tomorrow. Lows overnight will dip down into the upper 50s by early morning.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Bayer. Bayer is dedicated to delivering breakthroughs that save lives and feed the world using the scientific process. Learn more at sciencedelivers.com. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
The state attorney subpoenas the city council president over text saying his JEA board nomination was a big favor to a friend. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Thanks for joining us. Among the other topics we'll be discussing on the Friday News Roundtable, St. Augustine bucks its long-term relationship with the city's main horse carriage company. A mentally ill inmate is killed in custody despite the fact she wasn't supposed to be in jail. The Skyway's future continues to be up in the air, and the state could be left holding the bag for the costs of building Alligator Alcatraz despite promises of federal reimbursement. To talk about all that and more, I am joined by Nate Monroe, executive editor at the Florida Trib. Good morning, Nate.
Good morning, Ann.
Noah Hertz, St. Johns County reporter for Jacksonville Today. Hi, Noah.
Good morning.
Frank Powers, former assignment manager at WJXT News4Jax. Hey, Frank.
Good morning. And if you see a JA crew in your neighborhood doing work, tell them thank you.
Yeah, JEA crews always need a thumbs up. All right. And we're also joined by Tricia Booker, author and journalism professor at the University of North Florida. Good morning, Tricia.
Good morning.
So I'm going to start with JEA since Frank alluded to it. We have got now, Nate, JEA board appointments immersed in controversy, questions about the temperament of the CEO, former Mayor Lenny Curry looming in the background. Is there a little bit of deja vu that you're experiencing here?
Yeah. I spent a good part of my career in Jacksonville covering JEA, obviously the controversy that a lot of people remember from several years ago. But, even as a beat reporter before that, doing a little bit more unsung work, just covering the day in, day out. And it is one of those, like, when I think I'm out, they pull me back in kind of topics. Yeah.
So this most recent news is the subpoena that surfaced. Kevin Carrico, the city council president, he's being subpoenaed over text messages we've discussed on this program a little bit that he sent to a sitting JEA board member suggesting that he was going to be replaced with a friend of Carrico's as a favor. Now, Carrico hasn't given many interviews. He has issued a number of statements, but he did talk to News4Jax reporter Chris Will on Wednesday after the subpoena came from the state attorney's office. Let's take a listen and we can talk about it.
The state attorney has the obligation to look into that and see if there really was some kind of actual favor, transactional favor, which of course there wasn't. So we're happy to comply with this records request and give them all the information they need.
Favors have no place in government and no place in appointments?
Yeah, you shouldn't pay anyone back for anything. They should be appointed on their merits, and I believe Mr. Martinez has all the merits and all the credibility in this community to have been able to serve on that JEA board, and I'll find another person that has the same.
Where do we go from here to restore public trust in the process and in JEA?
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of time. I've got to comb through everything and give them all the documents that they needed and to satisfy their request to make sure that there are no records that say that there was, some kind of favor, some kind of quid pro quo here. There's not. They'll get that, and then we'll move on from there. We'll get a new appointment, and we'll continue to unravel what's going on with that crisis of leadership over at JEA.
Frank, he's talking about this crisis of leadership. We'll get to that and the JEA board discussion about their CEO.
Which was fascinating.
It was fascinating. What do you make, though, of this subpoena? Carrico here saying there was no quid pro quo in terms of him giving his boss his plum seat on the JEA board. We know from reporting that other stations have done that, he has gotten a 33% raise under this current boss that he was appointing to the JEA board. But he's basically saying, I'm going to give them the records. That's kind of it. What do you make of the subpoena?
Well, he has to comply. The state, as I understand it, the state attorney's office saw this, and they've run, I think this is the third in recent years, sunshine law investigation in which subpoenas were issued. So he calls it a poor choice of words, the word favor. It's almost like Clintonian in that, well, that depends on what your definition of the word favor is. He's trying to backtrack. His whatever mayoral aspirations he had have gone up in smoke. And now we see if there's going to be any impact on the JEA leadership.
Nate.
Yeah, there has been a lot of focus on the language that he used to discuss this appointment, and for good reason. Calling something a big favor, that sort of is what it is. But, beneath that, there is this foundational issue, which is that he was trying to put his boss on the JEA board. He could have discussed that in the most high-minded terms possible, and that would have been a scandal. And I think it's important for that not to get lost. At minimum, I think some perspective here is that there are like 1 million people in Jacksonville. The idea that Paul Martinez is the only or even the most qualified person for that appointment seems unlikely to me. And so, and this happens with a lot of city appointments, like this just projects this really blinkered view of this community that for this very prominent, the JEA board is the most important board really that we have in the city. You're just looking over to the office on your right and picking the person there. What was the process that he used to figure out who should go on this board? I think there just is kind of a foundational issue, even stripping away all of the kind of more interesting elements of it. And I just think it's important for that not to get lost.
It's a good point. Tricia, also this week after the subpoena, Kevin Carrico's colleague, Jimmy Peluso, also on city council, asked him to step aside, not to step down, but to give up his leadership role in council while this investigation is ongoing. A pretty unusual request, but there's no love lost, perhaps. We know that Kevin Carrico took back Jimmy Peluso's only committee assignment, and so he's sort of a man without a country when it comes to influence on the council in a committee sense.
Yeah, well, Kevin Carrico opened that door. He's literally under subpoena for handling of something that, as Nate was saying, is really important. And I think his choice of words is kind of important when he literally is saying in the text, dude, do me a solid for one of the most important boards in the city. And I maybe Jimmy Peluso was being, in Kevin Carrico's words, a drama queen, but also I think it's a completely appropriate request when the president of the city council is under investigation by the state attorney to perhaps step aside and say, yeah, I'm going to focus on this. And after I am cleared, after everything shows that I've done nothing wrong, then we can resume.
So behind all of this drama over the subpoena, the request to step aside, there is this JEA board meeting that happens this week. We have some audio from that meeting. So they're discussing JEA CEO Vicki Cavey. She is the former CEO, but a board member was asking her to resign. And so we're going to hear a couple of things here. One is her former chief of staff, Kurt Wilson, who complained about Vicki Cavey's leadership and was summarily ousted. And then we're going to hear from Joe DeSalvo. He is the chair of the JEA board, and he was defending Vicki Cavey's leadership. So let's listen to those, and we'll talk about it.
Predictably, this fatal flaw within JEA's leadership was revealed last week after receiving dozens of concerns from colleagues about Vicky's behavior. I relayed those concerns up the chain of command and was unemployed the next day. And while no one has reached out to inquire or investigate those concerns, I could not in good conscience remain silent when so many have asked for help. Unfortunately, it seems that Vicky is more interested in levying a smear campaign against me and packing a room full of supporters for her. If the desired outcome was to suppress any future complaints, it worked.
We went through this crap 5 years ago, a little bit 3 years ago. When the heck are we going to learn our lesson? And this is up to us board members to do what's right. As long as you can look yourself in the mirror and decide which way to go, fine. But we're not going to subject the JEA workforce or this community to unwanted drama brought on by external forces for whatever reason. And anything I'm saying, anybody out there knows exactly what the hell I'm talking about.
So there's a lot going on there. And I'm curious, Frank, what your thoughts are, because obviously Joe DeSalvo there at the end vehemently
he took
defending
control of the
this,
meeting and moved for the confidence vote.
voted a vote of confidence for KV. But Kurt Wilson is a known quantity in this city. He worked at Jacksonville Fire and Rescue for more than 2 decades. He'd worked at JEA for 4 years before this, and he levies a complaint against his boss and his position is eliminated. What's going on there?
Seemingly, he was working with Rick Morales. He's the JEA vice chairman who wants to be chairman, who was going around without telling his other board members, trying to get Vicky Cavey to resign. He says, which she denies, that she agreed, yeah, maybe it's time I should resign. Let me check my pension status. And then, according to Morales, she came back and said, no, I'm not going to resign, but Kurt Wilson is fired. There's a scorecard here, okay? Winners, and it's going to be Vicky Cavey and to some extent the mayor. Losers, starting with Ballard Partners, the lobbying firm who Vicky Cavey discontinued their consulting contract. Morales, he's not going to be the next chairman. If you listened to the meeting the other day, he was the one in the 6-1 confidence vote. Wilson needs a job, and Carrico, all losers in this.
Noah, in terms of the decision by the board, I'm curious, what people are saying about their decision not to in any way investigate these allegations. Obviously, the board chair said, we have confidence in KV. Other board members, I think, probably rightfully chastising their colleague for kind of making all of these decisions behind the scene, asking the CEO to resign. They said, Morales, that wasn't appropriate for you to do as an individual board member. And yet they've decided not to investigate claims that he said were widespread among senior leaders. Kurt Wilson echoing that, saying she has created a toxic and hostile work environment for her senior leadership team. JEA board is just not interested in looking into that.
Yeah, it definitely does not do much for public trust in situations like this. I think, again, I cover St. Johns County, so those are the things that are top of mind for me, but it reminds me a lot of when the St. Augustine Airport board was embroiled in scandals last year, and during a meeting, one of the board members suggested that they should conduct an internal investigation into allegations of breaking sunshine law, and the board members who had been accused of breaking sunshine law resoundingly voted against conducting an investigation. And, that was people made fun of them and laughed at them and talked about it on social media for weeks after that, because when you're being accused of something, it's not a good look. And especially with something as large as JEA, like everyone in Jacksonville is paying attention to this. I was at the governor's press conference in St. Augustine earlier this week, where he unveiled a new statue in St. Augustine. And the very first question during his question and answer period with the media was from a TV reporter who goes, have you been following what's going on with JEA and with the investigation going on? And to the governor's credit, he said he was not aware, and then said, it doesn't involve any of my staff, does it? And the reporter goes, no. And he goes, okay, good. And then moves on to the next question. But it's on everybody's minds in Jacksonville.
Nate, I want to ask you, from what I could tell at that meeting, nobody asked Vicky Cavey, the CEO, why her chief of staff was ousted. It seems like there would be some, at least mild interest in that. As we said, Kurt Wilson has been around for a while. A lot of people know him. The city council expressed that he's been a major point of contact for them in terms of keeping track of what's going on at JEA. And he got up and spoke and, expressed his concerns. What do we know about why he was let go?
Well, I guess to step back for a second, because I do think this context is important to sort of keep front of mind. We're talking about Vicky Cavey and JEA because Kevin Carrico was caught having this embarrassing conversation in text messages. Okay. And I think that you cannot remove that context from this. He was the person who he was supposed to be responding to questions about this big favor he was doing his buddy and putting him on the board, and just sort of throws out there this concern he apparently has about JEA leadership, and not just a toxic environment, but a racist environment. And what has been missing, from my view, and I have not heard or seen anything or any reporting that I think really fills this gap in. What is missing are documented specific allegations of misconduct. There's lots of vague, cryptic discussion about concerns, but that's nothing. I mean, what is a toxic work environment? A toxic work environment is kind of tricky because you can speak this into existence. What creates a toxic work environment? An internal investigation into the CEO. High profile board meetings where the CEO's future is discussed. That creates a toxic work environment. And so, there is this kind of element of speaking something into existence. And I sort of wonder if that's a little bit of a game that's being played here. That is a question that I have about a lot of this scrutiny, this very abrupt scrutiny on the CEO.
It's worth noting, too, that it was exactly a year ago that they renewed her contract with 100% of the vote and gave her a 20% raise, and there were no concerns raised.
And yet, Nate, I mean, should there not be some interest on the part of the board once these things have been raised, whether they were raised perhaps as a distraction from some sort of political embarrassment on Kevin Carrico's part? I mean, certainly, that is what Vicky Cavey made it sound like. She said this happened during an active political news cycle. It's no accident. But at the same time, if these allegations do exist, it does seem that the board would have at least some interest in looking into them, or no?
I mean, look, I think it depends on what your view of the board is. I mean, the board, I know one board member did say that they had fielded a complaint from someone and told them that there is this kind of normal process to follow, that you can file an HR complaint. We have an inspector general in the city that has the power to issue subpoenas to agencies like JEA. There's obviously the state attorney's office. There is the media.
Kurt Wilson, though, has said, you're not going to expect anybody else to step forward at this point. I lost my job.
Oh, look, the CEO gets to fire her chief of staff. That is something she gets to do. And so that is not in and of itself, that is not, necessarily inappropriate behavior. That's something that I'm sure Kurt Wilson is not happy he was fired. I would not expect him to be, right? And so I guess it depends. Do you instigate an internal investigation and hire a law firm to conduct an investigation of the CEO? I mean, what's the precedent there that somebody says something kind of vague about a toxic environment and that triggers this whole, those are tough on organizations.
Sure.
So, it took, just to remind people, when Aaron Zahn was running JEA, it took many months of extreme controversy before the board decided to have OGC investigate his leadership. So this is happening.
And that was financial improprieties and all kinds of other
financial
things.
impropriety, toxic work environment was part of it, which existed for months and nobody on the council cared about it, by the way. And so I'm looking at this and I'm just a little bit sort of, I don't know, maybe bemused at, the precedent and kind of standard that, I guess some people have an expectation could be set here.
Yeah. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Nate Monroe, Tricia Booker, Noah Hertz, and Frank Powers about the week's headlines. You can join our conversation at 904-549-2937, or you can go to firstcoastconnect.org. And you can find the other ways to connect with us. A couple of messages. Tom on Facebook saying I'm guessing Carrico, contradicts his own words in the message he sent, while at the same time he was obviously attempting the same kind of hostile takeover of the JEA board that Mayor Curry used to launch his failed bid to sell JEA. The timing of this, immediately after Curry's lobbying firm was let go, is suspicious. Marty emailing, no council member, especially the council president, should be in a position where favors appear to influence public decisions. The right course of action is simple: step down temporarily and allow the truth to speak for itself. We also have a call from Charles on the west side. Good morning, Charles. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. The question I had earlier, Ann, you mentioned that the board seat was a plum position. Exactly why is that a plum position? Is it because it's a stepping stone to political power, or could you please expound on that for me? And, because JEA seems to be the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. I mean, certainly it's a prestigious appointment. It is something that, very often people kind of accrue these board titles and use them moving forward. I mean, I would sort of ask you about that, Nate. What's your take on being on the JEA board in terms of its clout, its cachet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. It is the most influential board seat that you can get in the city. I mean, you are responsible for setting the electric and water rates for almost all of Duval County. After most people, after their rent or mortgage payments, your utility bill is like your biggest monthly payment you're making every month. So it's a position of considerable influence. And look, I mean, being able to put on your resume that you were a member of a board of directors of a $2 billion corporation, like there are benefits that accrue to you for that. I mean, it's just sort of willfully ignorant to pretend that there's no value to that sort of board seat.
In terms of the size of your JEA bill, that is something that the former mayor, Lenny Curry, raised. He started making the rounds. He called this station, but he ended up doing interviews with all of the local media, all of the television news outlets afterwards. And he basically said, he doesn't have any connection to what's going on at JEA. He said he wouldn't have recognized Vicky Cavey if she walked into a room. And he basically said, the closest he is to JEA right now, Noah, is when he gets his giant bill in the mail. But he was asked about the text messages that Kevin Carrico sent, and he's an ally of Carrico's and said he was as much. But he said he didn't think that the texts looked great.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, the political moment, I guess you could say, because I can imagine a political moment 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where something like that would be pretty devastating. But there's so much, how to say it delicately, consternation among the Jacksonville City Council. It certainly seems like that something like this is, it's a big battle. It becomes a really big thing. And I don't think, I'm not exactly necessarily speaking for Carrico specifically here, but I don't think anybody really wants to admit when they've maybe screwed up. And I mean, you heard him say that it's definitely, he's going to let them look into it, and they're going to look into everything surrounding it. But I think Curry's assessment that it doesn't look great is pretty accurate there.
We have a message, Frank, somebody who's responding to your scorecard that you're keeping, and they're putting Ron Salem, City Council member Ron Salem, on that list too. He, of course, is the liaison between the City Council and JEA. He was at that meeting sitting alongside all of the board members, but she says they kind of shut him down. He did speak, but then they kind of...
Well, twice he tried to speak, but DeSalvo wouldn't recognize him, and Salem was incensed as the liaison. And he addressed that at City Council the other night, suggesting that maybe the City Council would initiate an outside review of JEA leadership. As for Lenny Curry, there's an old phrase, methinks he doth protest too much. He still on social media likes to take shots at the current administration. The last one was a couple of weeks ago saying downtown is dead. So he's out there. Again, the whole thing started after Ballard's contract was ended.
That's the company, the lobbying company that he works for now.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, I do want to move on. There are other topics to discuss. I want to move on now to a controversy over the horse-drawn carriages in St. Augustine. Noah, this is something that you have been covering and has gotten additional traction in the last weeks and months. But tell us about this most recent development, what the city is doing with one of their providers.
Yeah, I think for a little bit of background for everybody listening and for you guys at the table who are not lucky enough to attend every St. Augustine City Commission meeting.
Like you are.
Like I
lucky
am, yes.
guy.
I love it. It has pretty much been a constant for the better part of the last year, I would say that the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting, so this is the general public comment period when anybody in the city, anybody really, can come up and talk about any issue that the city is not going to talk about. It has largely been dominated by animal rights activists who have been trying to call on the city to, at the most, end their practice of allowing horse-drawn carriages to offer tours around the historic downtown in St. Augustine, and at the very least terminate its contract with the largest of the carriage companies that operates in downtown St. Augustine. And the reasoning there, the reason that the activists ended up targeting this company called Country Carriages specifically is, one, there's a litany of violations that the company has, I guess you could say, accrued over the last decade. And a lot of these are smaller things. They would functionally be code enforcement violations. Then there are other things like leaving a horse at one of the stations where they're not supposed to leave them overnight and that kind of thing. For a little bit of background, Country Carriages has been in operation in St. Augustine for about 20 years. They hold the majority of the franchise licenses in St. Augustine. St. Augustine sort of operates like New York City cabs, where they give hypothetical medallions to carriages. And of the 15 that the city of St. Augustine has deployed to franchises, 10 of them are held by Country Carriages, or will be held until their contract expires. So with that background, activists have been targeting Country Carriages in part because of a 2023 incident that was caught on video where Bill Cushion, one of the owners of Country Carriages, is seen striking a horse in the head.
Like punching?
Like literally punching a horse, yes. And St. Augustine police investigated this incident. He admitted that, look, the horse was getting unruly, but maybe I went a little overboard, and St. Aug PD just kind of washed their hands of it and walked away. But it has been a staple at meetings for the last more than 6 months, where somebody will come up during the public comment period, they will pull up the video of Mr. Cushion hitting the horse, and then they will ask the overhead to zoom in on this video while they talk about how horse-drawn carriages are wrong and they shouldn't be doing them. So that was kind of the background to this discussion. So at Monday's St. Augustine City Commission meeting, the city decided twofold. One was to not renew Country Carriages' franchise license once it comes up for renewal in September. So they're not necessarily kicking them to the curb immediately, but when their license comes up for renewal later this year, they are not going to renew it. And they are also, along with that, not going to let Country Carriages renew their license or renew their lease at the city's owned stables on Riberia Street downtown. So it definitely came as a shock. I spoke with the city's general services director, who told me that it's pretty uncommon that the city chooses not to renew a license like this. So it definitely was a bit of a surprise, and it's one that the activists are definitely, they seem to be, based on reporting I've seen, claiming as a victory.
You know, Tricia, you will know that this is a debate that dates back literally decades in the city of St. Augustine. There have been kind of peaks and valleys in terms of the protest movement there, but it is revving up. There are people out there now routinely with large banners standing right alongside these horse-drawn carriages on the bayfront. Do you get a sense that this is measurably different, that we're seeing something that might be a real turn from this practice? Or do you think this is just one of many providers, as Noah says, and may not make a big difference?
No, I think we're definitely seeing it ramping up and people are more concerned. It hasn't just been an issue in St. Augustine. I grew up in New Orleans. It continues to be an issue in New Orleans. And you know, there's a saying, when you know better, you do better. And I think increasingly people are aware of animal suffering and how the treatment of the horses is resulting in the horses not doing well, the horses occasionally getting sick with contagious diseases such as the strangles. And I mean, you know, I'm sorry, maybe he went a little too far. You punched a horse in the head in public. I mean, it kind of makes you think what he's doing in private to discipline these horses. I think this is definitely a point where people are starting to think, okay, maybe this isn't the best use of it isn't the best look for even something that is as culturally significant as this.
Frank, part of what's happening in St. Augustine, obviously, is we're seeing a lot more traffic. We're seeing a lot more tourists, and it's perhaps creating more friction than existed previously between this sort of time-honored tradition in a sleepy old St. Augustine, where you've got these sort of, carriages, this sort of romantic view. There's a pretty intense traffic jam universally.
I'm amazed that there aren't more accidents involving carriages and the trolleys. There was a trolley accident years ago, but that was
there was a carriage accident years ago too, where a horse was injured or killed.
The conditions in the summer. This is, you mentioned decades. Animal rights activists have been raising hob about this, and we see pictures of the horses. A 90-degree day in August and the heat coming off those streets, that's oppressive. And last year we had I think a total of 18 either heat advisories or extreme heat advisories, and those are tough on the animals because they're out there, they go around, people are concerned that they have been overworked and getting overheated. A lot of the problems that they found that Noah mentioned there was at the stables, and the woman who runs that carriage company says they don't have the wherewithal to do a quick fix on those stables. So it's all come. I think it just got to be a point where too much, over and over again. We got to do something, and it's not the only one. There's still 2 or 3 more out there. So it's not the end of horse carriages in St. Augustine. It's just seemingly the end of the biggest one.
This is a company that owns 15 licenses, or 10 of the 15 of the city issues. So a big chunk of them.
Yeah, and to Frank's point too about the upkeep at the stables, the city framed this as, this is not about the condition that the horses are in. They recently sent some city employees and did more or less an investigation to check in on how the city-owned stables were doing.
They found the horses healthy and the conditions safe.
They said that everything was fine. Of course, it's unavoidable to then talk about the fact that there was recently an outbreak of strangles at that stable that resulted in the death of at least one horse connected to that. But they found that the horses were being treated fine, but the city acknowledged that the amount of manpower it takes to check in on those stables periodically, to do the fixes that are required for it, is taking a lot of staff time. And there was a sense among the city commission that maybe staff time could be better spent doing something
that's
else.
because the city owns these stables that they're inspecting. But there's nothing to say that these 10 licenses, once they end their deal with this provider, don't go to another horse-drawn carriage company.
Yeah.
Are there any designs on that property? It strikes me that those stables were once in a part of St. Augustine that was less developed along Riberia. Now it is one of the hottest addresses in the city. You've got a bunch of really new high-end restaurants there. Is the city maybe making a play for a redevelopment project on that site? Is there something of value besides just leasing to be a stable?
I think it's still too early to truly say, but there was a point made by City Commissioner Barbara Blonder at this week's meeting where they were talking about some of the existing flooding issues that occur on that parcel and how, there are flooding issues, but you can't really blame the country carriages folks for that because this is just the result of what the land is like. And so Commissioner Blonder said something to the effect of, maybe this land would be better served as not being a stable. And so maybe that is coming down the road. I think it's definitely something that remains to be seen. And like you said, 10 of the city's 15 franchise medallions holdings were held by this company, and at this point it's uncertain whether the city will dole those back out. That's totally up to the city commission at this point to determine whether they dole those back out or just live with a smaller footprint of the horse carriages downtown.
I do want to move on to another topic, a jail death. A woman who was ordered to the state hospital died in custody at the jail. This was last year, and it occurred, Tricia, after a transfer delay. This was reported by First Coast News, but can you tell us a little bit about this circumstance? This woman, Gemma Shunke, she'd been living with a diagnosed mental illness.
Yes, she had been living I spoke with someone who is very familiar with her, who knew her when she was at the beaches. He said she had been living in the homeless community at the beaches for several years. she was obviously mentally ill, he said. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that she needed mental health treatment. He said she was a kind woman, but because of her mental illness, she had bouts of violence. She was arrested for misdemeanor, put into the jail, immediately ordered by a judge to be transferred to a mental health facility. And by law, she needs to be transferred within 2 weeks. This has increasingly been something that the jails are unable to do because of lack of beds. So a month later, she was basically beaten to death by her cellmate at a time when she should not have even been in the jail. This person said people in the homeless community are kind of devastated. She was well known. She was at the Mission House on the regular basis. But I think what is most alarming to him and to people who are familiar with the situation is that it seems entirely preventable, that this was not a woman who would have made it long, and indeed did not make it long in jail. She needed to be someplace that was more secure for her condition.
Nate, it's long been said that the Duval County Jail is the largest mental health facility in Jacksonville. That remains true. But the population that we're talking about that are designated to be transferred to the state mental health facility, the state hospital, are in a different category. They are people who are sometimes grossly psychotic. They are, incompetent to a degree that they cannot know what's going on in their case. They can't communicate with their attorney. And so these are not people with just a general mental health issue that they might be able to be treated and remain in the jail. There's some additional treatment that's needed.
Yeah, but they remain in the jail. There's no room. Like this has been a problem for a long time. And it speaks to this just kind of larger issue that Florida has a crisis in its prisons and our jails. There's not enough oversight. We just don't have a good handle on this. And the way that we handle incarceration in the state is not ideal. To have a judge's order and not be able to comply with it seems like it should be a bigger problem than it is.
Yeah. Frank, this is a problem that has existed for a while. Sometimes teens have not been transferred timely. We know that this most recent reporting from First Coast News said that there's 43 inmates waiting to be transferred. But I know that, I personally reported on this back right after COVID, and statewide there was 450 people waiting that the state said they could not accommodate. Some of that was COVID related, post-COVID recovery, but basically saying we can't take them. They will therefore languish in the jail unless and until we have a bed open.
The problem started back in the 80s when federal judges shut down all the large mental health institutions across the country. The theory was that community-based treatment would take over and would meet the need. It has not. You have people that are in and out of the system. The system is a failure, as Nate pointed out. Somebody gets arrested for something, they get Baker acted for 48, 72 hours, they go right back out. There was a horror story from years ago that never gets old in the telling in its horror. A man was Baker acted 17 times. His mother pleaded with the system to do long-term incarceration for him so he could get treatment. It didn't happen, and then she told them, if you don't treat him, he's going to kill me. You know what he did? He broke into her house one night and killed her. And nothing happened after that.
Although he later on was himself killed in the mental health facility he ultimately ended up at.
Mm-hmm. There aren't the beds at either McClenny or the one out in the Panhandle. And you've got not just Duval County, but literally every jail in our area has people waiting for beds. They don't have them. Here's a thought, maybe. The $600 or so million that was spent on Alcatraz or Alligator Alcatraz, maybe we could build a few more mental health institutions to get people the treatment they need.
We've got a call from Tom on the west side. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Yeah, good morning to y'all, too. Yeah, this starts with funding of our mental health system, which needs to be increased to be adequate, and then comes to the overcrowding that results in the jail. We need to reduce the jail population by more civil citation and more reduction in cash bail because, the jail has become a place where people die, and we're still waiting for a final report on the Charles Faggart case.
Yeah, that's something, Nate, that you're outlet has covered quite a bit. We don't have any news, any brand new news on the
No.
Charles Fagert.
Nope.
That was a man who was killed in jail while he was with and at the hands of correctional officers.
Correct.
And, I think that his case is going to continue to resonate because he has loved ones, he had a community, he was well known. This is not a particularly sympathetic demographic. When people are committing crimes, they are addicted to drugs, they go into the jail, and the public kind of loses interest. And we all kind of do. They are a marginalized group, and I don't think there's a lot of appetite for putting a lot of money toward them, unfortunately.
Noah.
Yeah, Tricia, to your point, I mean, I think obviously, Nate, like you said, the jails are a huge component of this, but the unhoused crisis in Florida is also an enormous part of this. You have so many people, whether it's because of mental illness, whether it's because of money, fall through the cracks and end up living on the streets. And then there's really, unless they truly are able to get the support from some of the nonprofits that I'm sure would all say they could use more funding and more support, they oftentimes just languish, stay there on the streets, or end up in the jails and end up in a place where they should not be by all accounts. So it's a multifaceted issue, and I think the issue with people living on the streets is a huge part of it.
Just briefly, I do want to move on to some renderings that were released this week from JTA, Jacksonville Transportation Authority, about the future of the Skyway. Also a little deja vu here, Frank, but there's some options that are being introduced as if we're sort of back to the drawing board. Are we back to the drawing board on this? I mean,
I have one thing to say to JTA. Show me the riders. Because in the NAVI, by the way, I think NAVI now stands for No Autonomous Vehicle Interest. They were hoping to get, 280 riders a week or a day? And they've got, 1/3 of it, and that's going down. And
everybody says give it a chance, Frank.
Well, how long?
I don't know. I mean, maybe a couple of years. I think that people say it does deserve an opportunity to prove that it could be successful. But one of the options...
City Council is getting fed up with pouring money into it. The federal government is. The State Department of Transportation is. They want to see results. And to turn the Skyway into more NAVI space, I don't know.
That was one of the options. One of them, which we can show a drawing of, is the idea of turning it into something like the New York City High Line, which is a landscaped pedestrian walkway. Nate, I've just got to kind of get you to weigh in on that. I mean, it kind of looks cool.
Yeah.
Renderings.
You didn't ask me about the St. Augustine horse thing, and I was very grateful for that. Let's just say I'm not talking about downtown stuff for Lent. I'll just
okay. You're taking a break.
That up, yeah. I could take it. I was in New York last month for a couple of days and had the opportunity to walk the High Line.
That's
Granted,
cool.
it was 15 degrees out and it was very windy and it was very cold. But I don't know. I live in the downtown core. Not that I don't live in downtown, but I live in the urban core. I, as a big bike pedestrian advocate, love the idea of something more walkable.
Well, it's funny to me, Tricia, because this seems like maybe the one option that people really are enthusiastic about, and it has nothing to do with transportation or trying to get people around downtown or solving the problem of who's going to fund the Skyway.
Well, it's still kind of the Skyway to nowhere. I mean, we have given it 20 years and people aren't riding it. I mean, replacing it with another kind of vehicle that's going to zoom around. How is that going to help? Well, it's going to, whatever. I do think. I love the idea of the High Line. I don't know the financial implications of that. It doesn't. I don't know. It didn't seem to me to be a bad idea. Certainly, it would get more. I don't think there's any doubt that it would get more use than the actual Skyway.
Yeah.
Frank, I look forward to following this issue with you because I know that you're going to continue.
I've ridden the Skyway all of once when Billy Graham was here.
Okay.
We went
that
down,
day too.
Yeah, and that was it. And the ridership just isn't there. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, JTA keeps pouring money into that program, the NAVI program. They wound up with a $20 million deficit in their last fiscal year, and that's why the city council is starting at, how much is enough here?
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Noah Hertz, Nate Monroe, Tricia Booker, Frank Powers. Thank you so much for being here today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks,
Thank
Ann.
you. Thanks, Ann.
All right. Up next, a conservation hoedown connects you with your local Sierra Club.
The Cummer Museum of Art and Gardens presents Art in Bloom, uniting nature and creativity with flowers made of glass, ceramics, paper, wood, and even Lego. On display through September 13th. More information available at cummermuseum.org. Florida Theater presents Celtic Woman. The 4 Irish vocalists will perform classic and modern songs accompanied by dancers and an ensemble featuring traditional Celtic instruments. Sunday, March 29th at 7 p.m. Tickets and information available at floridatheater.com. Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
A deadly disease is making headlines in India. But how real is the threat here in the U.S.? What you need to know about the Nipah virus. On the next, What's Health Got to Do with It?
On the next Florida Roundup, we'll be in front of a live studio audience in Orlando at Central Florida Public Media. The superintendent of Orange County Schools will be with us talking about falling student enrollment and maybe closing schools. Plus, this is one of the most important years and decades for Florida's space industry. And then Orlando, it's more than just mouse ears and movie roller coasters, right? Wherever you are in Florida, what's your Orlando story? Email us radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Then join us Friday noon until 1.
President Trump again makes election fraud claims without evidence in his State of the Union speech and celebrates an economy Americans just don't see. On the next Friday News Roundup, what went unsaid in the speech, plus a new NPR investigation accuses the DOJ of withholding Epstein files on a woman who alleged abuse by Trump. We round up the news next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. The Northeast Florida Sierra Club is offering an introductory handshake this weekend, along with an old-fashioned hoedown. Here to talk about the Get to Know Your Sierra Club Symposium, we're joined by Susanna Randolph. She's director of the statewide chapter of the Sierra Club. Susanna, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. We're really excited about the upcoming event. Our Northeast Florida group has been working really hard on it.
So you're the featured speaker at the upcoming event and not the organizer, but I thought it was interesting that the choice was made to frame it with traditional music and dance. There's this band, Skin and Bones, that's going to be playing, kind of bluegrass, old-timey sounding string band. What was the idea there to kind of intersperse the speakers with something a little lighter like that?
Well, I think it's a chance to kind of build community in this moment where people are feeling very, I think, challenged by the environment around advocating for the environment. So this is an opportunity to say, hey, you can bring your family, bring your friends, and we'll talk about some serious issues. But I think what's important here is finding those folks who you can connect with and have common ground with and community with, so that we can really come together in this moment to protect Florida's environment when it's facing such challenges, existential challenges such as climate change, development, threats to our wildlife. But we want to be warriors for our environment, but we want to be joyful warriors and really build community. So I think this is a great tone to set for this event to really bring people together in common ground in all ways so that we can fight for what makes Florida really beautiful and special.
And so the theme is Get to Know Your Sierra Club. What do you think that most people do know about the Sierra Club, and what do you want them to know about it?
Well, we really want them to know that Sierra Club is a 134-year-old organization, but in Florida in particular, we have over 35,000 members, 140,000 supporters, 17 local groups, and that when we all come together and really fight for what we love about Florida, which is the beautiful and unique, iconic wildlife and wild areas we have here, we can win. We saw this last year when there was a threat to our state parks. We saw people from every walk of life, every political spectrum, every background come together and really fight for these special places that bring people together where families go to enjoy the environment. And so I think what we want folks to know is that Sierra Club is this place where we can come together and really fight to protect what we love, enjoy, explore, protect the beautiful, beautiful environment we have here in Florida.
And so you mentioned that series of protests that emerged over the state parks, and then locally there was a big protest as well over plans to sell off portions of the Guana Wildlife Management Area here in Ponte Vedra. Was Sierra Club able to use that, to capitalize on that moment, to bring people into the organization or to use it for organizing purposes?
Yeah, we saw people we saw people come out of the woodwork who had really never been involved. Some people, this is the first time they'd ever been to a protest, but they came out because they love Anastasia Island State Park. They love the Guana Reserve. So we saw people really come from every walk of life to protect these areas. And we were successful. We had bipartisan support. We had unanimous support across the board. And the governor actually signed the bill, even though he had originally put forward plans to develop the parks. He actually signed the bill that codified protection for these state parks. So we saw when people really come together across the board, we can win for these really important areas. And now there's even a bill advancing in the legislature by Representative Kim Kendall and Senator Debbie Mayfield to protect these areas like Guana Reserve and codify protections for those, so we don't have these land swaps that are happening and that have been proposed by developers. So we've seen real success when people come together. And so as a result of all of that, yeah, we've been able to really, build on that moment and really protect our areas.
So this is the third annual Sierra Symposium. We mentioned it on February 28th. It's at Tree Hill Nature Center. It's free. It's from 9:30 to noon. Tell us what your plan is. What do you personally plan to talk about?
I really want to give people hope and inspiration. I think it's been a fairly couple challenging years when we've seen this assault on state parks. We've seen this these land swaps. We've seen these land buys, land deals happen kind of in behind closed doors. I want to give people hope that if we show up together, we can not only work together to protect these areas that people love, but we can actually be joyful warriors. We can have fun together. We can build community together, and we can do this and build for the long term so that we can protect these areas that people love in Florida. So it's going to be a really just good time, have a lot of fun, but also get a good kind of dose of hope and inspiration that when we come together, each of us do a little bit, a lot can get done and a lot can get protected.
All right. Well, as we said, it's the third annual Sierra Symposium. You can find a link on our website. They do prefer an RSVP, but it is free to attend. Susanna Randolph, director of the statewide chapter of the Sierra Club. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for covering this. And we really hope to see everybody out there and can't wait to have a lot of fun and talk about real purpose to protect Florida's beauty.
Okay, great. Thank you. And that's our program. Thank you for listening. Thanks to everyone who called and emailed. We encourage your feedback and suggestions. You can send either to firstcoastconnect.org or you can go to you can find all of our past and current shows there. You can also sign up for our new daily newsletter. First Coast Connect is produced by Stacey Bennett, and our associate producer is Isabella Casapow. Our show is directed by Brady Quorum, and our theme music is performed by Club de Belugas. Join us Monday when we sit down with our own Dr. Joe Servant to talk about concerns over do-it-yourself peptides and healthcare. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The Players' Championship returns to TPC Sawgrass March 10th through 15th. Watch the PGA Tour's top players and enjoy local bites at the Stadium Course in Ponte Vedra Beach. More info and tickets available at theplayers.com.